Hello, welcome back. So when this video is going to be originally released on November 7th, that's going to be what's dubbed National or like Learn to Homebrew Day. So in honor of that, something that I wanted to try was to brew a clone of one of my favorite breweries in the area. So this clone is from Weldwerks. This is their kind of one of their main beers that they make. It's a bigger beer. It's their stout series. They call it their Achromatic Stout. So typically this beer is a high ABV beer. So sometimes it's 10 to 11% alcohol. These beers are a little bit sweeter and syrupier because it's just such a big malt bill. Because of that, typically they're balanced out with some kind of spice with them. I would say like the normal recipe, which I'll be making in this video, is you age it over cacao nibs and a vanilla bean to give it that kind of chocolatey and vanilla-y flavors that complement a stout really, really nicely. But for me, what I want to do is a 10% ABV beer is a little harder to brew, especially one of my first times of making this. So I'm going to turn this down. So I'm aiming for a beer that has an original gravity in the 1060 to 1070 range. This recipe came from beerandbrewing.com. So I'll link the original recipe down below if you ever want to make this clone. I do recommend it. This is a great stout. So to start out with this grain bill, with having something such a big beer and such a big complexity aspect to it, we're looking at about 75% two-row. And then for the specialty grains, we're going to start out with about 4% each of chocolate malt, pale malt, German rye, and C120. And then additionally to that, we're going to have 3% caramel 40 or crystal 40 and 3% flaked oats. This will help add to the body of this big stout. And then finally, to give that little roastiness, which is characteristic of a stout, we're going to have 1% roasted barley to this. That will give us, for my batch of beer, the total grain bill will come to about 9.3, and I'll show the whole actual recipe and what I use. And the recipe originally was built for a 5-gallon batch. I'm doing a much smaller batch than that. Then from there, we're going to talk about the mash. So the mash is the first step in the brew day. This is where you heat up your water and you basically make an oatmeal, right? So you're going to heat it up. In this case, I heat it to 157. I heat up my water in my pot to a little bit higher because I typically lose about 10 degrees in heat transferring it from the brew kettle to the mash tun. I put all of the grains again in my mesh bag. This works wonderfully. Honestly, I think this is the best thing I've learned in my short time of revisiting homebrewing. From there, when I touch the mash temperature is 157 degrees Fahrenheit, which is spot on. I do lose heat over time because I'm not able to keep heating this while it's mashing, but it ends in like the 150 range, which is totally fine for a mash for what I'm doing in this purposes. I got a Preboil Gravity, so I took a portion of the beer out before I went into the next step. Let it cool down to room temperature by putting it in the fridge, and I got a Preboil Gravity of 1042, which is spot on for what I want. Typically, my efficiency is somewhere between the 65 to 70 range. So this is totally right on track. Because the original recipe is an imperial stout base, the idea is you're going to be boiling for a long time to really, really concentrate all those sugars. So the longer you boil, the more concentrated it becomes because you're driving off the water. So in this case, I'm going to boil for 2 whole hours. But before that, we have to do the striking portion of this. So from there, what I did was I took the mesh bag out of the cooler that I have, place it into 2 gallons-ish of the strike water. I should also note that I had 3.5 gallons of water in the mash because that was a 1.5 quart to grain ratio, to pounded grain. And then I put that into the brew kettle. I heat up to 170, added the rest of the liquid to that, and heated that up to 170 again. Let it sit there for about 10 minutes. So once I hit that range, I cut the flame and then let it kind of soak up all the stuff, kill all the enzymes that are in there, pull out the grain, let it drain, squeeze it as much as I can to concentrate it out. to kind of help with the efficiency, because you do get loss in there and you're not rinsing off the grains. I think there's a way to maybe improve that in the future, but this is what I'm doing for right now for brew in the bag. Finally, from there, I boiled for 2 hours. Halfway through the boil, so after an hour of boiling, I added my only hop addition to this beer, which was just 1 ounce of Magnum hops to this. I continued to boil for another hour. Once I hit 10 minutes left in the boil, I added into the wort chiller. With the wort chiller in there, I recycle the water. I collect all the water and use it for other purposes, whether it be cleaning brewing equipment, watering various plants in my house, or whatever. It's a great way if you have the ability to just keep the water and use it for cleaning purposes. It's just, you're just using it to cool it down. Original gravity. My original gravity was 1061, which was exactly, it was lower than I wanted, but it's totally fine for this. I mean, I think that'll be a good ABV, so hopefully we'll get around a 6%-ish beer out of this. We'll see what the final gravity turns out to be. I got 3.5 gallons of wort out of this, which was more than I was looking for. I was hoping for 2 gallons, but I'm still tethering in what my boil-off rate is for my system based on the volume of wort that I start with. From there, the original recipe calls for White Labs California Ale Yeast, which is WLP001. I couldn't find that. It's a liquid ale yeast. When I ordered this, it was very, very hot out, and they don't recommend shipping liquid yeast. So what I used was the Verdant IPA ale yeast that I had captured previously from the other beer that I'll link down to which one I captured it from and how I grew up the yeast starter from that. So yeah, so I used that Verdant. I made a yeast starter out of this with just DME overnight, pitched it directly into it. And this ale yeast just rips through it. I mean, it's a very, very active strain of yeast. I think it was pretty much done within 3 days, I think, for the most part. It has a huge Krausen level at the top, which just shows very, very active fermentation. I let it start out about 70 degrees. It cools down in my basement over time, settled at about 64 degrees, which is the resting temperature of the basement, and then I let it sit there for 14 days total in fermentation, primary fermentation. After that, what I did was I split the batch. So first what I did was I was inspired by a beer that I had tried, which was this chai stout from Ballast Point years ago. I've never seen anyone else do this. Maybe it's just I haven't seen it, but I've never had another one like that. So from there, in doing some research, what I found was I wanted to use whole spices. So I used ginger, a vanilla bean, cloves, a nutmeg, and some dried cardamom. To all of that, I heated it into boiling water for about 10 minutes to kind of like, extract like a tea. From there, I added that directly into 1 gallon of beer. So I separated that from the main 3.5 gallons I started with and added the spices directly to that, and then used about 50 milliliters of the spice solution, the water solution that you get, and added that directly to this. The rest of this beer I transferred to a different fermenter, got it off of the yeast cake that sits at the bottom. Into that, I added another half of vanilla bean and cacao nibs again, which I boiled in water to kind of sanitize them, and then put them in a bag and drop that inside the fermenter. So both of these, I'm going to let them age for about 2 weeks over the spices. The chai, it's this chai spice stout itself. I'm going to bottle condition that one, see how that one turns out. I only have 1 keg, so I have to kind of choose. And because it's a smaller batch, I'll just bottle it instead. And the other one I'll put on tap into my smaller kegerator that fits in my fridge and see how it tastes. Hopefully this turns out great. I mean, when I tried it 2 weeks into fermentation, it had a very, very nice roasty flavor. It tasted very good at that point. So unless something gets messed up with the spiciness, it should be good. Thank you for getting to the end of this video and coming and watching my journey of homebrewing and other fermentation projects. There'll be more on my channel upcoming. I'll let you know in a future video when I taste this beer. I'll obviously do a side-by-side, one with the chai stout and one with the vanilla and cacao nib stout. So, again, thank you for tuning in. If you liked anything you saw, please subscribe, give it a like, comment down below if you're interested in what I've been doing and want to just give me some feedback. And then just continue following my channel for more adventures in fermentation. And coffee, that's the other thing. I'll typically post 1 coffee video a month, and the rest will be fermentation related to beer, brewing, anything that can be fermented, such as, pickles or onions or all of that. So, thank you. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next video.